This story is inspired by true events. Names and certain facts have been altered for narrative purposes and to protect the privacy of real individuals. The flames that consumed Detroit's 12th Street on that July night in 1968 would have broken most men. But for Marcus Khalil Washington, standing among the ashes of his neighborhood, they ignited something else entirely. A revolutionary fire that would transform not just his life, but the lives of thousands who had been forgotten by America's promise of equality. They called him dangerous. They called him radical. The FBI had a file on him 3 inches thick, and the local police considered him public enemy number 1. But in the streets of Detroit's black neighborhoods, they called him something else: teacher, protector, liberator. Just 5 years earlier, Marcus had been running numbers for the East Side Crew, his life a cycle of violence and prison cells. The man who would later inspire thousands to pick up books instead of guns had once been Detroit's most feared enforcer, known for his quick temper and quicker fists. But revolutions rarely begin where we expect them to. Sometimes they start in the darkest corners of a prison cell. Sometimes they begin with a single book. And sometimes they begin when a man realizes that the real enemy isn't the person standing across from him in the street. It's the system that put them both there in the first place. What transformed Marcus Washington from a street criminal into one of the most influential and controversial civil rights leaders of his generation? How did a man with an 8th grade education create an educational movement that challenged the very foundations of American society? And why did those in power fear him so much that they would stop at nothing to silence his message? This is not just another story about the civil rights movement. This is the story they didn't want you to hear, about a man who refused to turn the other cheek, who taught that true freedom could never be given but must be taken, and who believed that the path to liberation ran not through integration, but through revolution.
They want me to apologize for who I've become. They want me to feel shame for my past, to bow my head and beg for acceptance. But I learned something in that prison cell that changed everything. My life, our lives, were never mistakes to be corrected. We were weapons being forged in the fire of oppression. Every scar, every arrest, every night I went hungry, it was all preparation for this moment. Standing here watching my neighborhood burn, I see clearly for the first time. They didn't break us by accident, they broke us by design. And if we're going to fix what's broken, we can't use their tools. We need our own. We need education that liberates, not domesticates. We need power that protects, not persecutes. We need revolution, not reform. And it starts right here, right now, with us.
By the summer of 1968, Marcus Khalil Washington had become the most polarizing figure in Detroit's civil rights movement. While established leaders preached patience and integration, Marcus was building something unprecedented in the burned-out blocks of the East Side. A parallel system of black self-determination that threatened everything the power structure stood for. His typical day began before dawn, not because he was an early riser by nature, but because the FBI surveillance teams changed shifts at 6 a.m., giving him a 2-hour window to move freely. The apartment he called home was more arsenal than residence. Legal books stacked alongside ammunition, the writings of revolutionary thinkers from around the world mixed with lesson plans for teaching adults to read. On his wall hung photos not of family, but of the FBI agents assigned to trail him, their names and badge numbers meticulously documented. "Know your enemy better than they know you," he would tell his followers. It was a lesson he'd learned the hard way. The Liberation School he'd founded operated out of an abandoned Packard plant on the East Side, where assembly lines once built luxury cars for America's elite. Marcus now assembled minds, teaching Detroit's forgotten population to read, to think critically, and most controversially, to defend themselves. The curriculum was unlike anything in America's educational system. Alongside basic literacy, students learned their legal rights, studied revolutionary history from Haiti to Cuba, and yes, learned how to legally arm and protect their communities. The pushback came from all directions. White Detroit saw him as a terrorist in the making. The police harassed his students daily, conducted random searches that always seemed to target Liberation School members. But perhaps most painful was the resistance from within his own community. Middle-class black leaders, those who had achieved a measure of comfort within the system, viewed Marcus as a dangerous agitator who threatened their hard-won gains. "You're going to get us all killed," Reverend Thomas Jackson told him at a community meeting, his voice echoing through the half-empty church. Dr. King showed us the way through love, through peace, through working with our white brothers. Marcus's response would become legendary in Detroit's radical circles. "Dr. King is dead, Reverend. Shot down like a dog while preaching love to people who only understand power. How many more of us have to die before we realize that freedom has never been given freely? It has always been taken, by any means necessary." The economics of revolution were brutal. While established civil rights organizations had foundation support and wealthy donors, Marcus's movement survived on dollar donations from factory workers and domestic laborers. He drove a decade-old car held together by prayer and duct tape. His suits, always immaculate in public, were purchased from Goodwill and meticulously maintained. He ate one meal a day to stretch the budget, channeling every penny into books, building rental, and the legal defense fund that kept his people out of prison. The FBI's counterintelligence program, COINTELPRO, had designated him a Black Messiah candidate, someone with the charisma and intelligence to unite Black radical movements nationwide. Their tactics were relentless. They infiltrated his organization with informants, spread rumors about embezzlement, sent forged letters to create conflicts with other Black leaders. They even attempted to seduce him with beautiful women who were actually agents, hoping to create a scandal that would discredit him. But Marcus had learned paranoia as a survival skill in the streets. He trusted no one completely, compartmentalized information, and most importantly, lived a life so austere that there was nothing to scandalize. No drugs, no alcohol, no women, nothing that could be used against him. His only vice was books, consumed voraciously in the few hours between midnight and dawn when he allowed himself to stop working. The transformation he sparked was undeniable. In neighborhoods where literacy rates had been below 40%, his liberation schools produced hundreds of newly educated adults. Crime dropped in areas where his community defense patrols operated. Drug dealers found themselves confronted not by police, but by armed community members who gave them a simple choice: leave or face the consequences. But with every success came greater danger. The death threats were constant now. Slipped under his door, called into the school, spray painted on walls. "Dead nigger walking," one particularly graphic message read, complete with a drawing of a lynching. The police made it clear they wouldn't investigate. "You play with fire," Detective O'Brien told him with a smirk. "You gonna get burned." Still, Marcus pressed on, because in the faces of his students, the 50-year-old grandmother finally reading her first book, the ex-convict using education to escape the streets, the teenager learning that her history didn't begin with slavery, he saw the future being born. A future where Black people didn't beg for justice but created it themselves, where they didn't ask for power but took it, where they didn't seek acceptance into a sick system but built a healthy alternative. The question, he would tell his inner circle late at night, voices lowered against possible surveillance, isn't whether they'll kill me. They will. The question is whether what we're building is strong enough to survive without me. Because if it is, if we've truly taught our people to think and fight for themselves, then killing me will only spread the fire. As summer turned to fall in 1968, that fire was indeed spreading. Liberation schools were opening in Chicago, Oakland, and Philadelphia. The breakfast programs he'd started were feeding thousands of children. The community defense patrols had inspired similar groups nationwide. Marcus Khalil Washington, the former street criminal from Detroit, had become exactly what the FBI feared most. A Black leader who couldn't be bought, couldn't be intimidated, and couldn't be stopped by anything short of death. And even that, he suspected, might not be enough.
You want to know what exhaustion feels like? It's teaching a grandfather to write his name for the first time at 7 a.m., then standing between police batons and children trying to eat breakfast at 8. It's counting $23 in donations and trying to figure out how to feed 50 families. It's knowing that the car behind you has been there for the last 3 miles and wondering if today's the day they finally make their move. But you want to know what keeps me going? It's the light in that grandfather's eyes when he reads his first complete sentence. It's the mother who tells me her son chose books over the streets because of what we taught him. It's the teenager who stands a little taller because she knows her history, her real history, not the lies they feed us in their schools. They think I'm building an army. They're right, but not the way they imagine. I'm building an army of minds. Every person who learns to read is a soldier. Every child who eats breakfast at our program is ammunition against their system. Every family that learns to defend itself legally is a fortress they can't penetrate. They monitor my every move, tap my phones, follow me everywhere. Good. Let them watch. Let them see that you can't kill an idea whose time has come. They create extensive files, document every word I say. Excellent. They're writing the history of their own downfall. The Reverend asks how many more must die. I ask how many more must live on their knees. He preaches patience. I teach power. He promises heaven. I'm building freedom here on earth. He fears their violence. I recognize that we've been dying anyway, slowly, quietly, systemically. At least now we die standing up. This suit I wear? Bought it for $3 at Goodwill. But when I put it on, I'm wearing the dignity they tried to strip from us. This tie? It's not fashion, it's a noose transformed into a symbol of professionalism they said we could never achieve. These books I carry, each one is a weapon more dangerous than any gun. You see, they made one crucial mistake. They assumed that breaking us would keep us broken. They never imagined we'd take our shattered pieces and forge them into something harder than they could handle. They created the perfect conditions for revolution, then act surprised when revolutionaries emerge. Every day they threaten me. You're going to end up like Malcolm, they say, another dead radical. But they don't understand. Malcolm isn't dead. He lives in every liberation school. He speaks through every child who refuses to pledge allegiance to a flag that doesn't protect them. He breathes in every act of defiance against their system. So let them watch, let them threaten, let them plan. Because while they're focused on stopping me, thousands more are rising. And that's the beautiful irony. In trying to silence one voice, they're creating a chorus that will sing freedom songs at their funeral. Tomorrow, they might kill Marcus Washington, but tonight, the revolution continues.
The transformation of Marcus Washington didn't begin with a revelation. It began with a book slid under a cell door in solitary confinement. It was 1963, and Marcus was 2 years into a 10-year sentence for armed robbery. At 27, he had already spent a third of his life behind bars. The guard who delivered that worn copy of the autobiography of Malcolm X probably thought he was giving the troublemaker something to keep him quiet. He had no idea he was lighting a fuse. For 3 days, Marcus let the book serve as a pillow in his empty cell. Reading had never been his strong suit. 8th grade dropout, hustler since 13, fists always speaking louder than words. But solitary confinement has a way of making even the proudest man desperate for any escape. On the 4th day, with nothing but concrete walls and his own rage for company, he opened to the first page. "I've had enough of someone else's propaganda," Malcolm's words read. "I'm for truth, no matter who tells it." Something in those words reached past Marcus's armor. Here was another hustler, another convict, another angry black man, but transformed into something powerful. Not by magic, not by luck, but by books, by knowledge, by understanding the system that had caged them both. Marcus read the book 3 times in that first week. Then he did something that would have amazed anyone who knew him on the outside. He asked the guard for a dictionary. He was going to understand every word, master every concept. If Malcolm could transform from Detroit Red to Malcolm X, then Marcus Washington could become something more than inmate number 55847. What followed was an education more intense than any university. Copying the dictionary word by word, just as Malcolm had done. Reading everything the meager prison library offered: history, philosophy, law, discovering authors he'd never heard of: Frantz Fanon, W.E.B. Du Bois, Marcus Garvey. Each book was a revelation, each page proof that his life wasn't just a series of bad choices but the predictable outcome of a system designed to create men like him. The change didn't go unnoticed. Other inmates began gathering around him in the yard, drawn by this strange sight, the feared enforcer reading aloud from books about African civilizations and revolutionary theory. He started teaching literacy classes using whatever materials he could find. Men who had stabbed each other over cigarettes were now debating the nature of oppression and the philosophy of liberation. Prison officials grew nervous. Marcus Washington, the violent criminal they could handle. Marcus Washington, the teacher, the organizer, the man making hardened convicts question the system itself, that was dangerous. They transferred him 3 times in 18 months, trying to break up his influence. Each time, he simply started again, building new study groups, creating new revolutionaries. The letters he wrote from prison to Black Panther chapters, to radical educators, to anyone fighting the system, created a network waiting for him on the outside. He wasn't just serving time anymore, he was preparing for war. Not with guns and violence, but with the weapons he'd discovered were far more dangerous. Ideas that could not be killed, knowledge that could not be imprisoned, truth that could not be silenced. His parole hearing in 1965 shocked everyone present. The man who stood before the all-white board in his prison-issued clothes spoke with the eloquence of a professor. He quoted Supreme Court decisions, discussed rehabilitation theory, and articulated a vision for contributing to society that left them speechless. They had expected a thug begging for freedom. They got a revolutionary who had already found it. Gentlemen, he concluded, his voice steady and strong, you can parole my body or keep it caged, but my mind is already free, and that freedom is spreading to every man I've taught to read, every brother I've shown his own history. The question isn't whether I'm ready for society. The question is whether society is ready for what I've become. They granted his parole, perhaps hoping that the outside world would dilute his radical transformation. They were wrong, because Marcus Washington wasn't returning to the streets that had created him. He was returning to transform those streets, armed with the most dangerous weapon imaginable, the absolute certainty that change was not only possible but inevitable. The man who walked out of Jackson State Penitentiary in December 1965 carried only a cardboard box of books and letters. But in his mind, he carried blueprints for revolution. The hustler was dead. The teacher was born. And Detroit would never be the same.
You want to know when a man truly wakes up? It's not when he opens his eyes, it's when he finally sees. For 27 years, I was sleepwalking through life, thinking I was awake because my eyes were open. Fighting the wrong enemies, protecting the wrong territory, dying for the wrong causes. That cell they put me in, 6 by 9 feet of concrete and steel, they thought it would break me. Instead, it became my cocoon. Every book I read was another layer shed. Every word I learned was another bar bent. They locked up a caterpillar and created a butterfly, but butterflies with revolutionary consciousness don't float gently. They storm. Malcolm showed me the way, but I had to walk the path myself. Copying that dictionary, my hand cramping, eyes straining in the poor light, each word was a small victory against the system that wanted me ignorant. Oppression, liberation, consciousness. Words I couldn't even pronounce became weapons I could wield. The brothers inside thought I'd lost my mind. Washington's gone soft, they whispered, reading books like some kind of professor. Let them laugh. I was discovering something they couldn't see yet, that we were exactly where they wanted us, fighting each other over scraps while they feasted on our destruction. But knowledge changes the equation. Once you see the chains, you can't unsee them. Once you understand the game, you can't keep playing by their rules. Every man I taught to read, I was creating a soldier for the revolution. Every mind I opened, I was closing another chain in their system. They could transfer me, threaten me, throw me in the hole, but they couldn't stop the spread of consciousness. Because once a man truly understands his condition, he has only 2 choices: accept slavery or fight for freedom. And me, I made my choice in that cell, book in hand, dictionary at my side. I chose war, But a different kind of war, the kind where victories are measured in minds freed, not bodies counted.
By the winter of 1969, the forces arrayed against Marcus Washington had escalated from harassment to outright war. The explosion that ripped through the Liberation School at 3 a.m. on January 15th wasn't just an attack on a building. It was a declaration that the powers that be had decided Marcus was too dangerous to tolerate. The scene that greeted him at dawn was devastating. The main classroom, where just hours before adults had been learning to read, was now a skeleton of charred beams and melted plastic. The library, thousands of books collected through endless fundraisers and donations, was ash. Most heartbreaking were the students who had gathered outside, some still in their night clothes, weeping as they watched their hope burn. "They can burn our buildings," Marcus told the crowd, his voice carrying over the crackle of dying flames, "but they cannot burn what we've built in here." He pointed to his head, and here. His hand moved to his heart. "Classes resume tomorrow. If we have to teach in the streets, we teach in the streets." But the bombing was just the beginning. The FBI's COINTELPRO program had classified Marcus as a top priority target. Agents no longer bothered to hide their surveillance. They sat in marked cars outside the school, photographing everyone who entered. They visited employers, showing Marcus's FBI file, getting his supporters fired. They spread rumors in the community that donation money was being embezzled, that Marcus was secretly working for the CIA to identify radicals. The legal harassment was relentless. In February, police raided his apartment at 4 a.m., claiming an anonymous tip about illegal weapons. The guns they found were all legally registered, the paperwork meticulously maintained, but that didn't stop the arrest. The charges would eventually be dropped, but not before Marcus spent a week in jail and thousands in legal fees the movement couldn't afford. March brought an arrest for inciting violence after he taught a women's self-defense class. April saw charges of tax evasion. The IRS suddenly very interested in the Liberation School's shoestring finances. Each arrest meant time away from the movement, money spent on lawyers instead of books, energy devoted to legal battles instead of education. But perhaps the most painful blow came from within. Thomas Mitchell had been one of Marcus's first students, a former addict who had found redemption through education. He'd risen to become a trusted lieutenant, handling security for the school. The day Marcus discovered Thomas was an FBI informant, recruited with threats of sending him back to prison on old charges, something broke inside the revolutionary leader. "I don't blame you, brother," Marcus told Thomas in their final conversation, secretly recorded by the FBI. "They know exactly which pressure points to push. But understand this, you haven't just betrayed me. You've betrayed every child who eats breakfast in our program, every adult learning to read, every family depending on us for protection. You've chosen your individual freedom over our collective liberation." That's exactly what they wanted. The financial strangulation was systematic. Donors received visits from federal agents asking about their support for extremist organizations. The building inspector suddenly found dozens of violations in their new location. The health department shut down the breakfast program over minor infractions. Every dollar that came in seemed to disappear into fines, legal fees, and repairs from constant vandalism. Even within the Black community, Marcus faced growing opposition. The established civil rights organizations saw him as a threat to their funding and influence. Ministers preached against his godless ideology from pulpits across Detroit. Middle-class Blacks who had achieved a measure of success within the system viewed his revolutionary rhetoric as dangerous to their hard-won gains. "You're going to bring the white man's wrath down on all of us," City Councilman James Peterson, one of Detroit's first Black elected officials, told Marcus at a tense community meeting. "We've made progress through the system. Your way leads only to destruction." Marcus's response was characteristically direct. "Progress? You call having a few tokens in positions while our people still suffer progress. You mistake individual advancement for collective liberation. They let a few of us into the house to keep the rest of us in the field. I'm not interested in a seat at their table. I'm building our own table." The assassination attempts began in the summer of 1970. The first was crude. A car accelerating toward him as he crossed the street, Marcus diving between parked cars just in time. The second was more sophisticated. A sniper's bullet shattering his apartment window, missing his head by inches as he bent to pick up a book. He stopped sleeping in the same location twice, moved constantly, trusted no one with his full schedule. The psychological warfare was perhaps the cruelest. His mother received calls describing in graphic detail what would happen to her son. His sister's children were followed to school by strange men. Former students were offered money to publicly denounce him. Every relationship, every human connection became a potential vulnerability to be exploited. Through it all, Marcus maintained a public face of unshakable determination. But those closest to him saw the toll. The weight loss from stress and poor nutrition. The tremor in his hands from constant vigilance. The way he startled at sudden noises. The revolution was consuming its profit. Yet still, he persisted, because every morning, despite the bombs and bullets, the arrests and betrayals, students still came to learn. Parents still brought their children for free breakfast. Young men still chose education over the streets. The revolution wasn't just an idea anymore. It was a living reality in the lives of thousands. "They want me to stop," Marcus wrote in a letter to supporters that summer. "They want me to moderate my message, to work within their system, to accept their crumbs. But how can I stop when Sister Johnson, age 67, just read her first book? How can I moderate when Brother Williams uses his education to organize his factory? How can I accept crumbs when our children deserve the whole bakery?" The obstacles were overwhelming. The resources were depleted. The enemies were multiplying. But in the summer of 1970, Marcus Khalil Washington was still standing, still teaching, still fighting, because he understood a fundamental truth his enemies had forgotten. You can kill a revolutionary, but you cannot kill a revolution whose time has come.
They bombed our school. Let me say that again, so you understand the kind of enemy we face. They bombed a place where grandmothers were learning to write their names, where children ate their only hot meal of the day, where men were choosing books over bullets, and they called us the violent ones. Standing in those ashes, watching Sister Williams cry over her half-burned notebook, I understood something. This was never about education. It was about power. They don't fear what we're teaching. They fear that we're teaching at all. An educated black community that understands its history, its rights, its power, that's their nightmare scenario. The FBI follows me like I'm public enemy number one. You know what? Maybe I am. Because I'm an enemy of their public, the one that keeps us ignorant, dependent, and divided. Every book we put in a black child's hand is an act of war against their system. Every adult we teach to read is a soldier they can no longer command. Thomas's betrayal cut deep, not because I stopped trusting anyone completely years ago, but because it proved how thoroughly they've studied us. They know exactly how to turn our desperation against us. Use a man's children, his freedom, his fear, make him choose between his individual survival and our collective liberation. It's genius, really. Evil genius, but genius nonetheless. You ask how I keep going. Some nights I ask myself the same question. When the bullets miss by inches, when the jail cell door slams shut again, when another ally becomes an enemy. But then morning comes, and Brother Jackson is at the school door, eager to continue learning about labor law. Sister Davis brings her daughter, saying, "I want her to grow up fearless like you teach." That's when I remember, this isn't about Marcus Washington. It never was. I'm just a vessel for something much larger. They can break this vessel, but the contents have already spilled out, flowing into every mind we've opened, every spirit we've awakened. That's what they don't understand. You can't assassinate an idea whose time has come. You can only make martyrs that prove its necessity.
The Marcus Washington who emerged from the crucible of 1970 was a different kind of revolutionary. The fire was still there, but it burned with a controlled intensity that was far more dangerous to the system than his previous rage. He had learned what his enemies feared most wasn't his anger. It was his evolution into a strategist who understood their game better than they did. The transformation began with a simple realization. Martyrdom was exactly what they wanted. A dead radical became a cautionary tale. A living teacher who adapted and evolved? That was the real threat. So Marcus did what they never expected. He became a student again, this time of their own system. Law books replaced revolutionary manifestos on his nightstand. Court precedents became his new ammunition. If we're going to fight the system, he told his inner circle, we need to understand it better than the people running it. Every law they use against us has a counter law. Every tactic they employ has a legal defense. We're going to beat them at their own game while building our own. The liberation schools evolved too. Instead of just teaching literacy, they became comprehensive community education centers. Legal clinics where people learned to represent themselves in court. Financial literacy classes that showed how the economic system trapped them in poverty. Health education that revealed how medical racism was killing their communities. Each program meticulously documented, legally bulletproof, impossible to shut down without exposing the system's hypocrisy. Perhaps most surprisingly, Marcus began building bridges with unlikely allies. Progressive lawyers who saw the justice in his cause. Reform-minded police officers tired of being tools of oppression. White radicals who understood that racial justice and economic justice were inseparable. Even some members of the establishment who privately admitted the system needed fundamental change. His speaking style evolved too. At Wayne State University, facing an auditorium of skeptical white students, the old Marcus would have thundered about revolution. The evolved Marcus came armed with statistics, legal precedents, and irrefutable logic. He dissected systemic racism like a surgeon, each cut precise and backed by evidence. By the end, even his harshest critics couldn't deny his points. I'm not here to make you feel guilty about being white, he told them. I'm here to make you understand that the same system oppressing us is exploiting you too. They pay you just enough more to make you think you're on their side. But check your parents' mortgage rates versus ours. Compare your schools to the ones in Grosse Pointe. Your house slaves looking down on field slaves while the master robs us both. The Community Defense Fund he established became a model for legal resistance. Instead of confrontational Black Panther-style patrols, Marcus trained community members in de-escalation, legal observation, and documentation. Every police interaction was filmed, every violation recorded. The resulting lawsuits began draining city coffers and forcing policy changes. But perhaps the most profound transformation was personal. At his mother's hospital bedside, she had collapsed from the stress of constant threats. Marcus confronted the cost of revolution on those who loved him. Her frail hand in his, she spoke words that would reshape his approach. I'm proud of you, son, but I need to know this movement will outlive you. Because they will kill you, baby. Sure as the sun rises, they will kill you if you don't build something bigger than Marcus Washington. That night, Marcus began the hardest work of his life, making himself dispensable. He intensified the training of other teachers, documenting every method, every strategy. He created organizational structures that could function without him. He recorded hundreds of hours of lessons, building an archive of revolutionary education that could survive his assassination. The young radicals who came to him talking about armed revolution found not encouragement but strategic redirection. You want to shoot cops? He'd ask. That's exactly what they want. Dead cops become martyrs, justify more oppression. You want to really fight? Become a lawyer and prosecute them. Become a teacher and arm our children with knowledge. Become a doctor and save the lives their system destroys. Revolution isn't always spectacular. Sometimes it's a grandmother learning to read and teaching her grandchildren that slavery wasn't their fault. By the end of 1970, the FBI's surveillance reports noted with alarm that Marcus Washington had become more dangerous than ever. Not because he was advocating violence, but because he had evolved beyond their ability to easily categorize and destroy him. He wasn't just a radical anymore, he was building institutions. He wasn't just protesting the system, he was creating alternatives to it. The revolution isn't a sprint. He wrote in his journal, That December. It's a relay race. My job isn't to reach the finish line. It's to run my portion with everything I have and pass the baton to the next runner. And make sure there are enough runners trained and ready so that no single fallen runner can stop the race. The angry young man who had left prison 5 years earlier was gone. In his place stood a revolutionary architect, building foundations for change that would outlast any individual. The transformation was complete. The real work was just beginning.
They expected me to burn out or be burned up. Instead, I learned to burn steady, like a pilot light that ignites 1,000 other flames. Anger is gasoline, powerful but quickly consumed. Strategy is solar power, sustainable, renewable, impossible to exhaust. My mother's words haunt me, build something bigger than Marcus Washington. She understood what I was too proud to see. This movement couldn't be about me. The moment it becomes about the individual, it dies with the individual. So I evolve, from warrior to teacher, from fighter to builder, from personality to principle. Every young brother who comes wanting to kill for the cause, I show them how to live for it instead. Every system they use against us, I teach our people to master and subvert. You see, they prepared for Malcolm. They prepared for Panthers. They didn't prepare for revolutionaries who could beat them in court, out-organize them in communities, and outthink them in strategy. They didn't prepare for transformation. That's the final lesson. Revolution isn't destruction, it's construction. Not tearing down, building up. Not dying for the cause, living for it so fiercely that death becomes irrelevant.
The morning of March 15th, 1971, marked a triumph that even Marcus Washington's most optimistic supporters couldn't have imagined 5 years earlier. As he stood before a crowd of 5,000 at Detroit's Hart Plaza, the former street hustler turned revolutionary educator gazed out at living proof that transformation was possible. Not just for individuals, but for entire communities. The Liberation Education Festival wasn't just a celebration. It was a demonstration of power. 12 liberation schools now operated across Detroit, each a fortress of learning in neighborhoods the system had written off. The legal clinic he'd established had just won a landmark case against police brutality, setting precedents that would protect citizens nationwide. The breakfast program was feeding 10,000 children daily, shaming the city government into expanding their own nutrition programs. But the real victory was in the faces before him. There stood James Mitchell, former drug dealer, now teaching African history. Sarah Williams, domestic worker for 30 years, now running a financial literacy program that had helped dozens of families buy their first homes. Robert Chun, son of Chinese immigrants, teaching martial arts and self-discipline to Black youth, building bridges between communities that the system tried to keep divided. They wanted us to believe we were nothing. Marcus's voice rang out across the plaza, that we came from nothing and would amount to nothing. But look around you. Look at what nothing has built. Every child eating breakfast, every adult reading their first book, every family defending their rights, that's our revolution. Not someday, not somewhere else. Right here, right now. The system that had tried to destroy Marcus Washington was now forced to negotiate with him. Mayor Roman Gribbs, who had once called him Detroit's most dangerous radical, now sat across from him at City Hall, discussing police reform. The police chief who had orchestrated raids on liberation schools now implemented community policing programs that Marcus had designed. They hadn't embraced his ideology. They had simply recognized that his movement had become too powerful to ignore. The congressional testimony that exposed COINTELPRO's operations came from meticulous documentation Marcus had maintained despite every attempt to destroy it. Standing before senators who had once dismissed him as a communist agitator, he laid out evidence of illegal surveillance, assassination attempts, and systematic destruction of Black leadership. His presentation was so thorough, so legally unassailable, that it contributed to the program's eventual exposure and dismantling. Personal vindications came too. City Councilman James Peterson, who had once called Marcus a threat to Black progress, stood at the festival podium to publicly apologize. "I was wrong," Peterson admitted to the crowd. "I confused acceptance with liberation. I mistook tokens for progress. Brother Marcus showed us that real power comes not from being invited to their table, but from building our own feast. Even Detective O'Brien, the cop who had harassed Marcus for years, had undergone a transformation. Disgusted by the corruption he witnessed, he became a secret informant for the movement, warning them of planned raids. "You were right," he told Marcus in a clandestine meeting. "I spent 20 years thinking I was protecting society. Turns out I was protecting the people destroying it." But perhaps the sweetest triumph was seeing his mother in the crowd, fully recovered and beaming with pride. The woman who had once begged him to be careful now wore a button reading Marcus Washington's Mama, and proud of it. Her presence was a reminder that the revolution wasn't abstract. It was about real people, real families, real communities claiming their dignity. As the festival concluded, Marcus didn't speak of victory. Instead, he introduced the next generation of leaders, young men and women who had been children when he started, now ready to carry the movement forward. Each one represented a different aspect of the struggle: education, legal defense, economic empowerment, community organization. "My name is Marcus Washington," he concluded, his voice carrying the weight of every battle fought and won. "But this movement has 1,000 names, 10,000 names. It will have 1,000,000 names before we're done. Because you cannot kill what lives in the hearts of the people. You cannot destroy what we build together. You cannot stop tomorrow from coming." The applause that erupted wasn't just for Marcus. It was for themselves, for surviving, for learning, for fighting, for winning. The man they had tried to silence had become a chorus. The criminal they had tried to cage had liberated thousands. The revolution they had tried to prevent had already happened. In classrooms across Detroit that night, adults learned to read by lamplight. Children went to bed with full stomachs. Families knew their rights and how to defend them. And Marcus Washington, the boy from the streets who had become a teacher of teachers, prepared for tomorrow's lessons. Because the revolution, the real revolution, was just beginning.
Standing here, looking at what we've built, I'm tempted to feel proud. But pride is a luxury revolutionaries can't afford. Because for every child we feed, 10 go hungry. For every adult we teach, 100 remain trapped in ignorance. For every family we protect, 1,000 suffer in silence. So no, this isn't victory. This is proof of concept. We've shown it's possible. Now comes the hard part, making it inevitable. Not in one city, but every city. Not for some, but for all. They thought they were creating a criminal when they pushed me to the streets. They thought they were containing a problem when they locked me up. They thought they were eliminating a threat when they tried to kill me. At every step, they created exactly what they feared most, a man with nothing to lose and everything to give. But I'm not special. I'm evidence. Evidence that inside every written-off life is a teacher waiting to emerge. Inside every criminal is a leader society refused to recognize. Inside every nothing is everything, waiting for the right conditions to flourish. Tomorrow, we continue. Forever, we continue.
On a cold February morning in 1972, 3 bullets ended the life of Marcus Khalil Washington. He died as he had lived, teaching. His final class was about legal rights during arrest, his students frantically trying to stop the bleeding as he whispered his last words. "Keep teaching. Always keep teaching." They killed the man, but they were 50,000 funerals too late. Because by then, Marcus Washington existed in every student who had learned to read, every child who had eaten breakfast, every family that knew their rights. His assassination, meant to end a movement, instead immortalized it. Within weeks, liberation schools across the country renamed themselves Marcus Washington Academies. The curriculum he had developed was published and distributed freely. His final act of revolution from beyond the grave. Students he had taught became teachers. Children he had fed became doctors and lawyers. Communities he had organized became politically powerful. By the 1980s, former liberation school students sat on city councils across America. By the 1990s, they were reshaping education policy at state levels. By the 2000s, the grandson of one of Marcus's first students would stand in the Oval Office, taking the oath of presidency. each victory a testament to a man who believed that education was the ultimate revolution. The methods Marcus pioneered, community self-defense, legal literacy, revolutionary education, became blueprints for movements worldwide. From favelas in Brazil to townships in South Africa, oppressed communities studied the Detroit model of transformation through education. Academic dissertations analyzed his techniques. Military strategists studied his organizational methods. But they all missed the essence. It was never about methods. It was about belief. Marcus Washington believed that inside every person society had written off was unlimited potential waiting to be unlocked. He believed that education wasn't just about reading and writing. It was about reading the world and writing your own destiny. He believed that the greatest weapon against oppression wasn't guns or bombs, but minds that refused to accept lies as truth. Today, Marcus Washington academies operate in 15 cities. The breakfast programs he started have evolved into comprehensive community support systems. The legal clinics he established have become models for grassroots justice. But perhaps his greatest legacy lives in moments too small for history books. Every time someone picks up a book instead of a gun, every time knowledge triumphs over ignorance, every time a community chooses education over resignation. Sister Williams, now 93, still teaches at the original Detroit Academy. Using the same methods Marcus taught her in 1968, she guides her great-granddaughter through her first sentences. In that moment, an elder passing knowledge to a child, the cycle of ignorance broken, the future being written one word at a time, Marcus Washington lives. They thought they were silencing a radical. Instead, they created a legend. They thought they were ending a movement. Instead, they guaranteed its immortality. Because Marcus Washington understood a fundamental truth. You cannot kill a teacher who lives in every lesson taught, every mind opened, every future changed. The revolution continues. The teaching never stops.
If you're hearing this, I'm probably dead. Good. That means you're listening closer than you ever did when I was alive. Death has a way of clarifying messages. Here's mine. You are not nothing. You never were. They needed you to believe that lie to keep you enslaved. But now you know the truth. Inside you is a universe of possibility. Inside your community is the power to transform the world. I'm gone, but I'm everywhere. In every book opened, every child fed, every mind freed. I am you, continuing the work. Teach someone today. The revolution depends on it.
Marcus Washington died in 1972. But look around, do you see his ghost? It's in every underfunded classroom where teachers spend their own money on supplies. It's in every community center feeding children whose only crime is being born poor. It's in every person who refuses to accept that their zip code determines their destiny. The systems that created Marcus Washington still exist. The schools that failed him still fail millions. The streets that claimed him still claim our youth. The prisons that tried to break him still warehouse human potential. The only difference is now we know these aren't accidents. They're architecture. But here's what Marcus taught us. If they can architect oppression, we can architect liberation. If they can design systems to break us, we can build systems to remake us. If they can teach us to hate ourselves, we can learn to love our power. You don't need to be Marcus Washington. You need to be you, awakened. That grandmother who can't read, teach her. That teenager everyone's written off, mentor them. That injustice everyone accepts as normal, challenge it. That gift inside you that the world tried to bury, dig it up, share it, multiply it. The revolution Marcus Washington started isn't in some distant future. It's in your next decision. Will you accept the world as it is, or will you teach someone that it can be different? Will you wait for a savior, or will you recognize that we save ourselves one lesson, one meal, one awakened mind at a time? Marcus Washington is dead. Long live Marcus Washington. In every person who chooses education over ignorance, community over isolation, revolution over resignation. The next chapter of this story isn't his to write. It's yours. What will you teach today?
They'll tell you I'm dead. They're wrong. I'm more alive than ever. I live in every lesson you teach. I breathe in every mind you free. I fight in every stand you take. You want to honor my memory? Don't build statues, build schools. Don't say my name. Teach someone theirs. Don't mourn my death. Live my message. The revolution isn't coming, it's here, waiting for you to join it. Pick up a book, feed a child, know your rights, teach someone else. That's how we win. That's how I live forever, through you.